Hi, class. All right, so this is the first lesson of the second unit, purpose and text structure, right? So we talked a little bit about text structure and how to set up an argument, and now we're going to look more deeply at how there's some other structures that authors use when they're putting together their writing, and it depends on what the purpose is of their writing, right? So why am I writing this? That's going to determine what the structure is that I use. As always, the guided notes are here and available to you, and a super good way to keep track of what you're thinking while you're doing your work so that you can make sure you remember it and do well on the tests. All right, so we're here. And this is the intro. And again, another feature that you can use is to have it read for you.
Author's purpose is no.
All right, so I just kind of explained this to you that authors choose the purpose that they choose the structure to fit the purpose. So if I'm going to write a recipe, I want to tell you how to make my famous mac and cheese, then I'm going to write it down as a recipe. I'm going to give you a list of ingredients first, and then I'm going to tell you first do this and then do that, right? And it's going to be in chronological order. It might be bullet pointed or 1, 2, 3, step by step, because it will be written differently than if I wanted to tell you a story about the first time I made mac and cheese for my daughter's birthday party and all the funny things that happened there, right? That would be a story. I would write it as a narrative. Again, I would still choose chronological, which is like in clock order, because that makes for a better story. And look, sometimes people like to start at the end of a story and then come back. That can be another way. But the first thing you're going to do is come over to this screen. You'll look at text structure, and before we even get there, there's a section I must have skipped. There's a warm-up, right? And when you do your warm-up, you'll just decide whether or not you know any of this already, right? You might. And so if you do well and you know all this already, you can go faster through the lesson. If you get a lot of them wrong on your first try with this warm-up, then probably you want to make sure you go slower through the lesson and use the notes, right? Once you know something and it's stuck in your brain, it's really much easier to access that information and catch it again. But if it's the first time it's going into your brain, of course you're not going to learn it easily. So learning is, in part, works really well when you make a mistake. So I'm not going to do this for you because I want you to do it yourself and learn the difference between a cause and effect structure, a compare-contrast structure, a problem-solution structure, chronological, and description. And these are the definitions, right? So you'll just do your best to match and submit, and the computer will tell you if you're right or wrong. All right, moving right along. This is where they actually teach you about these different text structures, right? All the different ones we just went over. Here they're teaching you directly about them. And so again, you can use this to listen. You can also use the highlighter tool if you think you want to highlight something that's important. It can really help you understand. For instance, we'll do compare contrast because I'm guessing that's one you've been exposed to before by 9th grade. The compare contrast structure analyzes similarities, right? So I'm going to be looking for similarities, and I'll make those blue, and differences, and I'll make those pink, between 2 or more items. A compare contrast structure can answer these questions. What's being compared? How are they alike? Right? And so how are they alike? That's my blue question. And how are they different? That's my pink question. So just by taking the time to do that, I'm putting this in my brain a little deeper than if I didn't. I can also go over and find the, right, and differences between 2 or more items or ideas. So how are these elements the same, and how are they different? All right, so now I'm keeping notes here and I'm working through this. Again, you're going to do this as much as you need to, and that's going to vary by student depending on how well you learned this in the past, right? If you've noticed, English is really, it always comes back over the same stuff. So text structure is probably not completely new to you. Maybe it's going into more depth now. But even in Unit 1, we talked about the structure of argument essay, and now in Unit 2, we're giving you more possible structures. All right. This is an interesting idea.
Multiple text structures.
Let's just read this.
A text can use more than one text structure. Authors may use an overall text structure to present the main idea. However, within the text, authors can use a variety of structures to serve the desired purpose. For example, an author may use an overall cause-effect structure to show the impact of a new law that passed. But one section of the text might follow a chronological structure to show a timeline of the law's effect on the community. Both structures help the author achieve the overall purpose.
Okay, so again, this just depends on how long your text is, right? So when I'm talking about a full-length book, it's going to have more complexity to it, and it will usually not be so simplistically structured. In fact, when they are, they're not very interesting. So you'll see multiple text structures, usually with longer works. All right, here's another little activity, right? So now that you've done some learning, this is a chance for you to check yourself. Again, this is not a test, but I will be able to see whatever your answers were. So I'll be able to tell, were you able to grasp it quickly on the first try or not? So we've already gone over compare contrast. Let's look at a question for that. This has got to be it, right? So that goes there. Now I'm going to let you go back and do the rest of this. You'll submit and check your answers. You'll get a chance to try again. It will tell you what the answers are. Again, this is not the test. This is practice. And don't be afraid to get it wrong, because your brain actually learns better when you get it wrong. So when you get a question wrong and then you find out what the answer is, you're far more likely to learn it. It's fabulous. All right. We'll keep going. You'll work on author's purpose, right? Which is really, why on earth are they writing? Sometimes you might wonder, why is there so much written? Well, every author has a reason why. And so this gives you the 3 steps to identifying that purpose, right? Identify the main idea of each section. And then, why did they structure it in this way? Ask yourself that question. Why do I have this information first and this information next and this information after that, right? They do it for a purpose, probably for problem solution or some other structure. And then finally, step 3, put it all together and try and figure out what is that author's purpose. Once you figure out what the author's purpose is, it's easier to find out what the meaning is and read it and understand it, because then you know whether or not you've got it. All right, so after you determine the text structure and the author's purpose, you can analyze how the use of text structure helps the author achieve that purpose. And this is really what most of English class is, analysis. It's, what do you think? After you understand what the structure is, after you can pull it apart into pieces, talk about it. So how effective is the structure to help them present the information? Explain why the author chose that text structure. All right. We're going to analyze structure and the purpose, and then you're going to try it on your own, right? So this is when we get into the next section. There is a worksheet here that you want to open up. This is the worksheet. Again, this worksheet is not part of that test grade, but if you were to complete it and send it to me, and you could easily send it to me by downloading it here and then uploading it as a file. I'm not sure if you know how to do that, so I could show you, but just text me if you don't know how to do that. But attach it as a file and email it to me. Okay, so this would be, you take it here and you make it your worksheet and save it someplace like your desktop, right? And then when you go into your email, you can email it to me as an attachment, this worksheet. But you can write right here and put these questions in before you do anything else. But again, if you're not a good test taker, completing worksheets like this and sending them to me is evidence of your understanding of the content, and so it would override the test score. Back here, you'll keep going, right? Notice that it's 25 possible things to do, and we're on page 17. All right. So again, another question to check if you've got some understanding here. And some more work to do, another pop out, right, where there's a piece to read. Now here, this is the piece that doesn't get read aloud to you. So I'll read it aloud for you. If you don't need this read aloud, you can skip this part of this Polish Politics, an excerpt from The Disappearing Spoon by Sam Keen. Poland did not exist when one of the most famous Poles ever, Marie Sklodowska, was born in Warsaw in 1867. At the same time, Mendeleev was constructing his great tables. 4 years earlier, the Russians had taken control of Warsaw after the Polish people attempted to gain independence. Russia had backward views on educating women, so the girl's father tutored her himself. She was particularly interested in and good at science, but she also joined some political groups that wanted independence for Poland. After demonstrating too often against the wrong people, Sklodowska had to move to Poland's other great cultural center, Krakow. Even there, she could not get the scientific training she wanted. She finally moved to the Sorbonne in faraway Paris. She planned to return to her homeland after she earned a PhD, but having fallen in love with Pierre Curie, she decided to stay in France. In the 1890s, Marie and Pierre Curie began perhaps the most fruitful partnership in science history. Studying radioactive elements, those with unstable nuclei, was the new field of the day, and Marie's work on uranium, the heaviest natural element, was brilliant. The Curies shared the 1903 Nobel Prize in Physics for their work with radioactivity and uranium. Throughout the time she was in France, Marie never stopped viewing herself as Polish. Indeed, Curie was an early example of a species whose population exploded during the 20th century, the refugee scientist. Science, like any other human activity, has always been filled with politics, and the 20th century is full of examples of politics and empires warping science. Scientists often buried their heads in lab work and hoped that the world around them would figure out its problems as neatly as their equations. A mistake. Not long after winning the Nobel Prize, Curie made another discovery. After performing experiments to purify uranium, she noticed that the leftover waste, which she normally had simply threw away, was 300 times more radioactive than uranium. Hopeful that the waste contained an unknown element, she and her husband began boiling down the thousands of pounds of pitch blende uranium ore in a cauldron and stirring it with an iron rod almost as big as myself, she later said. It took years of tedious work, and all they got were a few grams of the residue to study. But from those few grams, they discovered 2 new elements. In 1911, she won another Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry. As discoverers of the new elements, the Curies earned the right to name them, and Marie called the first element they isolated polonium, from Polonia, the Latin for Poland, after her homeland. No element had been named for a political cause before, and Marie hoped that her choice would help the Polish struggle for independence. But naming her first element after Poland contributed nothing. Worse, the second element she discovered, radium, element 88, glowed an amazing green color and soon appeared in consumer products worldwide. People even drank water with radium added from radium-lined ceramic jugs called Rivigators as a health tonic. Overall, radium overshadowed polonium and caused exactly the sensation that Curie had hoped for with the element named after Poland. Even worse, polonium was linked to lung cancer from cigarettes, since tobacco plants absorbed polonium excessively well and concentrated it in their leaves. Irene Juliette Curie, Marie's daughter, also suffered at the hands of polonium. A brilliant scientist herself, Irene and her husband, Frederick Joliot Curie, picked up on Marie's work, and Irene won her own Nobel Prize in 1935. Unfortunately, one day in 1946, a capsule of polonium exploded in Irene's laboratory, and she inhaled Marie's beloved element. Jolie Curie died of leukemia in 1956, just as her mother had 22 years before. Ironically, radioactive substances had since become crucial medical tools. When swallowed in small amounts, radioactive tracers light up organs and soft tissues just as X-rays show bones. Virtually every hospital in the world uses tracers, and a whole branch of medicine called radiology deals with them. All right, so I hope that was helpful. Now, you're going to remember to write 2 questions, right? We're focused on this text structure. What is the text structure that the author is using in that? And what do we think the purpose is? And how effective is that text structure in achieving this purpose? So, we read Polish Politics and we saw a chronological structure, right? We saw that it described the events in her life as they happened. The signal words that were used were things like earlier and before, and that shows us that we're dealing with chronology and time. It also answered these questions. What event is being described, and do the details need to be told in a particular order? Right? They needed to be told in order from her birth to her death. Otherwise, it wouldn't have made as much sense. All right. So that structure is really helpful because it helps the author achieve their purpose, right? The very first 2 paragraphs were who is Marie and where was she born and what was big deal about her being educated and why did she move to France, right? That's there. And then in paragraphs 3 through 6, we've got the work on radioactivity and discovery of the 2 elements that resulted in the Nobel Prizes. And then towards the end, where she's making a political statement by naming that element after her homeland, but then backfired when that element turned to be a cancer-causing agent. All right, so the purpose of this text is to inform readers about the influence that politics has on science. You don't think about it, but politics has a huge influence on science. And this is relevant, right? One thing that I do as a reader is try and connect it back to something current to make it make sense. Why am I bothering learning about this? Well, we're in a time right now where politics is having an incredible impact on science, right? And where there are actually science deniers in our government and people that are not listening to the scientists around the coronavirus. So to be an informed thinker, to be someone who can analyze the text structures is going to keep me better informed about this new current event thing that's happening in the world and that has impact on me. So as I read around what's happening in the world with coronavirus and politics, if I understand how to find the author's purpose, I can tell the difference between someone who's trying to give me false information and someone who's using really solid techniques, right? Like we learned in the last unit, are they using logical fallacies? Are they using that, right? All of that's really relevant and can help us. So there's a reason to learn about the author's purpose and how texts are structures. It helps you understand them better and analyze them better and not be duped, because there's a lot of misinformation in the world right now. All right. The last thing that you'll want to make sure you do is this lesson activity. And again, these lesson activities, when you write in the boxes, actually support your test score. So if you do better here than you did on that multiple choice test, I will give you the grade that I determine based on what I see in these boxes, right? So let's make sure we know what we're supposed to do here. Read the instructions for this self-checked activity. I will be able to see it though. Type in your response to each question and check your answers. At the end of the activity, write a brief evaluation of your work. All right. That self-evaluation is important as well. I want you to really self-reflect on how well are you learning and how well are you thinking. So in this activity, you're going to analyze the text structure and the author's purpose in a text, right? So I'm looking for 2 things, text structure and author's purpose. First, notice they're giving me a signal word there. I will determine the text structure. Then another signal word. I will identify the author's purpose. All right. Oh, and here's a third signal word. Finally, so I have to do one last thing. I will analyze the author's use of text structure to achieve the purpose. All right. So I color-coded that just so that I would be able to remember what to do, right? First I do this, then I do that, finally I do this. For this activity, you will analyze one of these tasks. Okay, leftovers and tracers, or organic chemistry. About the same length. This has something to do with Marie Curie again. This is something about organic chemistry. I'm going to choose leftovers and tracers, but you should choose whichever you want. And then briefly examine each text and select one to analyze for the activity, right? So I'm only picking one. And then I just, in this box, right, I have selected. So I have, and that would be it for that box, right? And then here, I'm going to decide the text structure used in the text that I've collected by using the signal words and questions that identified. And remember, when I was over here, these are the signal words and questions, right? So if you've done the notes on all of this, you'll be able to easily determine which text structure it is because you'll have done that work already. And then those questions go here, right? And then you'll identify the text structure that way. And then based on that text structure, you're going to, what are the main ideas in each paragraph? And therefore, what's the author's purpose? And then now you'll analyze how the text structure helps the author achieve his purpose. All right. So this is, analysis is the part that most students really don't want to do. It's the part that you think is self-explanatory, right? This is where you actually, in your own words, explain that you get what we were trying to teach you here. So you're going to make a statement, right? And that's a sentence, identifying the author's choice of text structure and how it contributes to the purpose. So that's one thing. I need evidence from the text. And I need to explain how the evidence supports. All right, so I need to do those three things. Identify the text structure. How does it contribute to the overall purpose? What do I see as evidence, right? And that evidence from the text could be these signal words and phrases. I know I'm dealing with cause and effect because I'm looking at language that signals cause and effect. And then finally, this self-evaluation. If 5 is the highest score, what score do you get? And then, what did you learn? We're not here to prove how smart you are, right? This is about what did you learn? So if you already knew this, great. Say that I really knew it and nothing challenged me. But if not, if it was like, oh, I really thought I understood this, but this piece, write that down. It will help you learn it better. All right, that would be it. Then there's a summary. The summary just goes over what you should have learned and will help you really know if you get the summary, then you really understood the lesson. And then you should be ready to take the test and do fine on it. But if you're not a test doing person, then just make sure that you've done this lesson activity page to the best of your ability. I'll go back and look at this and then you'll do fine. All right, I hope that was helpful. And please text me or email me with any questions. Good luck.